Great to be back here. I was at the Texas LP convention. It was in Austin. That's all I remember. The years fade away, but I remember it was very pleasant. And so it's great to be here again. I guess I'm slated for a current affairs topic, and a lot of fantastic things happening in the world. Well, you wouldn't know it from the National Party. I'll get back to that a little later. What's happening in the world is that there's literally we're really living through what the historians call a revolutionary moment in history. It's like something like living through the French Revolution, and fortunately, we're living at it for a fairly safe spot. But we can kind of watch it on TV, which is my favorite way of watching a revolution. But what we're seeing is literally the collapse of the big movement of the 20th century, namely socialism. We're seeing the death of socialism, death throes. And socialism was the big movement of the 20th century. It was the big ideological and political movement. And what we're seeing at the end of the 20th century is one of the really exciting time in which to live, because we're seeing the collapse of socialism, the revolutionary implosion of socialism. What happened was that over the last several centuries, starting in the 17th and going up to the 18th and 19th century, we had an upward march, not of course every day, but basically an upward march of freedom, and the death of the old order, which was statism and serfdom and slavery and theocracy. And rising up from this muck was the idea of individual freedom and the institution of individual freedom. Personal freedom, religious freedom, political freedom, economic freedom, free markets. And with that came international peace, replacing constant dynastic wars and territorial conquests, and the rise for the first time in history of mass consumption. In other words, standards of living, not only increasing standards of living, but standards of living that were actually rising from subsistence level, where the general public could buy stuff. This is unusual, unique in world history. In the old days, you didn't buy stuff. You didn't go to the store and buy stuff. What you did was the housewife, you bought cloth if you had the money, and the housewife would sew the clothing and stuff. And that was the idea of mass production for a consumer market as an industrial revolution concept, as the product of the free markets of the 18th and 19th centuries. So what you had is, just saying the gross and standard of living doesn't really encompass that. It's the beginning of a real living standard. And with this, you have a tremendous progress in all areas, in civilization and economics and personal liberty, and technology, which goes along with it. And so the 19th century was the breaking through of this such several century old movement of what we call classical liberalism. Of course, those days they didn't call it classical. We call it classical because it sort of died out, and we're trying to eventually restore it. And this liberal movement was rising. Everything was going great, and the liberals at the time were very optimistic, as they should be. And then something happened. A glitch happened. Something happened on the way to Nirvana. And the something that happened was the development of socialism, which was a brand new idea in human history. And the socialist idea, which really sprouts in the 1830s and 1840s in Europe, was that we can still have this, because the previous opposition to classical liberalism, the opposition to freedom, was an opposition to the defense of the old order. It was a specifically anti-industrial, anti-mass consumption movement. The idea of keeping the lords and the dukes and the earls in their places in the state churches, and keeping their power and position. It was specifically and frankly an anti-general freedom movement and anti-industrial movement. Well, the socialists came along and said, look, we can do both things. We can have the same thing too. We can have higher standards of living. Matter of fact, we'll have better than liberalism or capitalism does it. We can have a high advancing standard of living. We can have freedom, and we can have everybody be happy, and so forth and so on. We can do it through state control. We have better ways through statism, and we can have, in fact, we'll have more state control than before. We'll have the people's state instead of having a class state of a few people running it, a few dukes and kings, etc. We can have the whole people collectively running the people. So this concept of collectivism is a brand new thing that sounded great and was generally supported by many folk who was either yearn for the old order or try to blend the two, liberalism and anti-liberalism, into one allegedly higher synthesis. And so by the end of the 19th century, if you go read some of the classical liberals, it's a sad thing, because the classical liberals of the late 19th century, around 1900, saw the whole thing as cracking. The socialism was on the march, and the general public was backing it. Because the general public previously had backed libertarianism or classical liberalism. We were a mass movement in the 19th century. In England and much of the continent and the United States, we had the votes. We had Libertarian Party, so to speak, not the name, but the actual content. Well, by 1890s or 1900, the days of night were closing in, the shades were closing in, and Herbert Spencer and other classical liberals writing at the time were very pessimistic. My God, the whole thing is shot. Civilization has had it, and as such, they were right. They foresaw the terror of the 20th century, the Gulag, etc., of the 20th century. Anyway, by 1900 or so, the general opinion, so-called intelligent opinion, was socialism is morally correct. That's right, it's morally correct that social justice will be imposed, etc., through this new collectivism. And the only problem was, will it work? People weren't sure it would work, because it's so radical and new. But the thing is, socialists have captured a conquer of the high moral ground. Everybody agreed that they're morally correct, but just certain practicalities hadn't cleared up yet. Well, if you're in a situation where everybody says, in general opinion, and intellectuals, etc., say that the socialists are right, or they're morally correct, it's just we're not sure it will work, the inevitable next step is, okay, let's let them try it. Let's see if it'll work or not. And that's what happened in the 20th century. It sums up the 20th century, starting, of course, with a Bolshevik revolution. And we'll let it work. I grew up in the 1930s, and in the 1930s, the general view was, well, of course, there's certain excesses in Russia. Few people got their head chopped off, but this is a noble experiment. Let's see if the socialist experiment works. We'll have to see. We'll have to wait and see. Let's see if the famous phrase in those days was, in order to make an omelet, you have to break some eggs. And of course, the people who were the eggs didn't like it too much. But who cares if we have a wonderful collective omelet, which we can all eat? Okay. Well, anyway, we now have the record. Okay, I mean, after the 20th century, is essentially, as I say, a process of socialism working itself out. And by the way, I see no difference really between socialism and communism. I feel it's the same thing. By the way, this was the view of the original socialists of the 1830s and 40s. To them, socialism and communism are interchangeable terms. And it's only later in the 20th century when the fruits of socialism began to be pretty bitter. People didn't like the fact, hey, we got slave labor here and mass murder. And then socialists in the United States would say, well, that's not our socialism. We didn't plan on that. We want democratic socialism with freedom and free speech and all that. Just we want collective ownership of the means of production. So the idea of so-called democratic socialism was a cop-out where socialists refused to accept the consequences of their own policy and action. And in World War II, when F.A. Hayek wrote The Road to Serfdom, this was a big thing. If you read it now, it seems kind of plunky. It seems to be sort of everybody agrees on this, but they didn't agree on it at the time. When he wrote The Road to Serfdom in 1943-44, this is a revolutionary statement, because what he said was, there ain't no such thing as democratic socialism. You have government ownership and planning of means of production. If you have government planning of the economy, it means everybody's life is being planned. You can't have free speech, you can't have democracy, you can't have freedom of the press, freedom of assembly or expression if you have government ownership and control of the means of production. It's essentially what he said, in those days was bitterly opposed by most right-thinking, upstanding right-thinking people. It now turns out, I'm going to show evidence of this as going along, this is now agreed upon by almost everybody. Almost everybody, certainly in the communist countries, agree on it. That economic freedom and free markets go hand in hand with personal freedom and freedom of the press and freedom of expression. What happens is that with the record of socialism piling up, after World War II becomes pretty obvious. You have slave labor camps, gulags, concentration camps, mass murder, genocide, et cetera, begin to have a kind of a weakening of the position here. The legitimacy, the high moral ground begins to crumble a bit. Okay? and public opinion and general intellectuals, etc., begin to realize there's something morally bad about socialism. Doesn't seem to really give the high moral ground here. And also what happened, I think, is also important to realize here that what happens over history, we think of it, and at the time we think of every day-to-day things as not happening, no changes are taking place. Look at still seeing jerks in power, Democrats, Republicans. It looks as if nothing's really happening. There's no change. It's sort of a frozen system. Well, it continues, quote, frozen, unquote, for a long time as small tensions develop, disagreements, conflicts, and suddenly, this is what's happening now in the communist countries, suddenly, bingo, like that, sudden eruption, like the French Revolution. Nothing much was happening in France for about 80 years, more and more statism, people grumbling, et cetera, and suddenly, there's some trigger, and there's an eruption of all the pent-up tensions and conflicts that have been piling up. So, what happened in the communist countries is the original revolutionary generation began to die out. If you're committing your whole life to a cause, if you're up on the guerrilla warfare on the hills or whatever you are, and you seize power in a country, as in Russia or in Cuba or whatever, or in China, the original revolutionary generation is committed to it. They murder all the people who are not committed to it, for one thing. All the people, the dissidents and the guys who are beginning to question get sent to slave labor camp or get killed. And so these guys continue to be committed to the cause until they die out. And I'm not in favor of death, you understand, but there's a certain sociologically, the older generation of the people with the revolutionary leadership die out. The younger people coming up are not that committed. They're sort of born into the system. It's a big difference between fighting on the hills and marching down and taking over and seizing power. It's a very heady thing to seize power. You can put up with a lot of heartache and starvation, etc., especially if you're in the ruling elite. You don't get the starving anyway. You're in pretty good shape. And so being in the ruling elite and having founded the new revolutionary society, you're going to be committed to it for life in general. But the new people coming up, as the next generation succeeds generation, they're not committed to it. They're just born in it. And the fascinating thing is that the totalitarian, one of the lessons of the current situation of the totalitarianism doesn't work. This doesn't work. Because these people were brought up in Russia and China and et cetera, brought up from the year zero to listen to all this crap, getting it from the government-run educational system, down to the local block level. You owe your life to the society, you're the slave of the state, et cetera, et cetera. And it doesn't take. The great thing is it doesn't take. And freedom is obviously a natural condition of mankind. It just erupts. You can't crush the spirit of freedom. It's just magnificent. So the 1984, the Orwell doom and gloom message was a great book, but it's not true because it doesn't work. You can't suppress the spirit of freedom. That's what we're finding out. I remember when the Chinese communists first took over in the 1950s or so, there was I think the Yugoslavs had a very interesting movie about China, communist China. I saw the movie. It was very interesting because the interviewer was talking to an allegedly average Chinese communist family, and they asked the mother and father, what would you like your kid to be when he grows up? And they said, well, all we want for the kid is to be an obedient subject of the government, the state, the people's state. It was a pretty chilling thing to watch. And I said to myself, geez, is it really true? Have really brainwashed this whole nation? Is it really true that mankind has been transformed? The so-called new socialist man has been created, which is just some willing robots to the state apparatus. And I had a friend of mine at the time who had just been released. He'd been in the State Department in China. He was an intern during the Korean War. And but he was a China expert. And I asked him, well, is this really true? Is it true that Chinese are totally brainwashed? We're going to have a new socialist man, new communist man emerging? And he said, no, don't worry about it, because in China is an old tradition. When a central government official comes to town, you tell him what he wants to hear. And when he leaves town, you go about your business again. And so it turned out. And it's a marvelous thing. It's a wonderful thing, the way people can adapt and yet keep much of their personal integrity. And so, of course, it turns out to be true. So the new generation coming up, they hear about Marxism, Leninism. Well, they don't believe this crap anymore. And about 10 years ago or so, Earl Ravenel, who's a libertarian foreign policy expert, went to Russia for the first time in many years, visited Moscow. This is way before any kind of glasnost of perestroika. And he came back, I spoke to him, he said, you know, it's a fantastic thing. Nobody in Russia believes in Marxism anymore. Nobody. He spoke to all sorts of people, big shots, little shots, whatever. Nobody believes this junk anymore. But so what began to happen is, as the generations continue, had a bunch of people in power who were sort of operating by inertia. They wanted to keep their power, obviously, but there was no more legitimacy on the part of they had no more legitimacy. No more Marxism, Leninism, purely lip service. And once you lose your legitimacy, you lose your moral legitimacy, so to speak, the rest, the collapse of the system becomes inevitable, especially if the system doesn't work, is my next point. I mean, there was the moral legitimacy of socialism is finished, and certainly finished in the communist country. It's not finished, unfortunately, in the West. The only Marxists left are in American universities, Western European universities. It began to be a joke. It's not much of a joke, it's sort of a political joke, but it's a pretty good, nevertheless. And among economists, this was by the 1950s and 60s, when most economists in the West were still Keynesians and semi-socialists. And the joke was at international economic conferences, the economists from the communist countries were talking about the virtues of the free market, and the economists from the West were talking about the virtues of government planning. Okay, well, this keeps going on. It's kept escalating, and what you have is in the communist countries where it's obvious. First, they lose the moral legitimacy and the revolutionary enthusiasm, and then they see the goddamn thing doesn't work. It just doesn't work. You don't get mass prosperity. You have mass starvation. And a grinding, crummy system that keeps on, and if you get any consumer goods at all, it's all gray and miserable, crummy. Okay? And they don't want to live in a crummy world. Okay? And they see the interchange with the West. They see that other people are in pretty good shape, and why can't we have the same sort of thing? And they're committed. In the communist countries, they're committed to the industrial revolution. They're committed to a modern industrial economy. They realize they can't get it with under socialism. They just can't get it. They become painfully obvious as time is going on. And so what's happened is that there's a collapse of legitimacy, and followed now by a collapse of obviously the economy and a reaching out to try to get rid of this. How do we get rid of this damn status system? Essentially the questions, and now they're coursing through Eastern Europe and the communist countries in general. There's a marvelous little story in Los Angeles. Every day something new happens. I was just reading a review of a book, I guess by Walter Lacour. I guess it was in the New York Review of Books. It was an expert on Russia. And the reviewer said, well, it's an interesting book, but it was written, just came out. It was written in late 1988, and it's all obsolete now. So much has happened. All the stuff the guy says is now rendered untrue by events. Okay, so what happens in a revolutionary period is fantastically radical change. Deng Xiaoping used to be a liberal reformer. He started as a movement toward the free market in China about 10 years ago. He's now a reactionary pig, repressing the people. But he has the same views that he had before, just the events have outpaced it. It's very much like the French Revolution. And just hasn't caught up with the idea. If you want to have a free market and modern industry, you have to have free expression and free speech, free press. Hasn't realized that yet. Of course, he's cracking it now. He's also an old guardsman. He's one of the Long March people. One thing about China, by the way, is that as everybody knows, but I think we should emphasize this, the leadership are all in the upper 80s or early 90s. I mean, the youngsters, the young liberals, are about 75. I mean, if this were the only thing that attracts me about communist China is if I were communist China, I'd be a brilliant teenage youth leader. But these guys are going to disappear pretty soon, and the people who are not committed to the revolutionary generation, didn't march from Yan'an or whatever in 1937, it's going to be very different. I think the forces of freedom are going to win out. So a lot of one fascinating article in the Los Angeles Times a few months ago was this: a guy who was in Moscow, was born in Russia, had been an American citizen for many years, has set up for the first time in Russia a copy center. You all know about copy centers; they're all over the place. This is a revolutionary thing. How can you have a copy center in a country which tries to be totalitarian, which tries to keep people from learning anything? You can't do it. Once you allow copy machines, that's the end of totalitarianism. Okay, but they want to prohibit copy machines. First, they want a modern world. They want high tech. How can you have high tech without copy machines, without personal computers, How can you have a personal computer still have a totalitarianism, hermetically sealed country? You can't do it. So the force of modern technology, the force of the Industrial Revolution requires a free market. And it's becoming obvious to even the leadership, much less the public, and the communist countries. And he said this is the beginning. He hopes to have a whole chain of copy centers. Okay, and that's just tip of the iceberg. The only countries now, there are two countries, I think, I mean, I could be corrected on this, there are two countries in the world which still prohibit typewriters among the public. In order to have a typewriter, you have to have a government license, you have to be carefully investigated and all that. One is Albania, which is sort of, Albania, what can I say about Albania? It's the place that nobody wants to go, even Albanian. Okay, no tourists go to Albania for excellent reason. And Iraq, where the heroic free world leader Saddam Hussein, monster who, kills every peasant's hut has a picture of Hussein on his wall, otherwise he's shot. Outside of that, all countries permit typewriters, and they're going to permit copy centers, they're going to permit personal computers and all the rest of it, otherwise they ain't nowhere. So what we see then is, let's say, breaking up of the whole communist, the communist totalitarian center. All the books we've read, we've grown up on, the picturing communism as a Russian monolith, but a very efficient monolith, of course, by the way, satanic. The usual right-wing picture, the Cold War picture of Russia or communism is of a satanic, brilliantly efficient, monolithic movement organized by the Kremlin, which is going to take over unless we nuke them right away. And this whole thing is now obsolete. If it were true at all, which I don't think it was, it's certainly now obsolete. You can't keep saying that anymore. The whole thing is now like reading about some 17th century cult, because the whole thing is now cracking up. They're even attacking Lenin now in Russia. They're even attacking Marx, some of the radicals. I mean, the whole thing starts with Marx. We have to investigate this whole business. They're publishing Solzhenitsyn. They're doing almost anything you can say. I mean, Yeltsin is going. I mean, to think on a nationwide Soviet television, a guy gets up on the Soviet Congress and bitterly attacks the KGB. I mean, this Olympic wrestler attacks it bitterly, man. Anything we could have said, he did the same thing. And the head of the KGB gets up and says, "Well, you're right, but that wasn't my regime. I just came in there. I'm going to reform it now." I mean, he's speaking like an American politician, for Christ's sake. There's a great cartoon. By the way, in Russia and in Poland now, of course, in one sense, they're more democratic than we are, because if they have these guys running unopposed for election. This happened in Russia a few months ago and happened in Poland just the other day. They're running unopposed, and you cross their name out, and they don't get elected. They don't get a majority of the votes of those voting. They get defeated. In other words, none of the above now operates only in Russia and Poland, not in the United States. In Nevada, my state of Nevada, there's none of the above, but it's only symbolic. Doesn't mean a damn thing. In other words, if none of the above gets a majority, your guy still gets in. In Russia and Poland, it's now effective. Okay, and they did it. They really crossed their names out. So there's a marvelous cartoon after the Russian election where these top communists, unopposed communists in Moscow and Leningrad were defeated. And there's a great cartoon. They're sitting around on a panel facing the audience, three defeated Russian communist politicians. One guy says, "What are we going to do now?" The other guy says, "Don't worry, we'll become lobbyists and consultants." So, adopting the good old American practice. So as I say, these are fantastic things. My own personal experience goes along with this. I was not in any of these countries at the recent glasnost period, but I was twice in Hungary and twice in Poland. It was kind of interesting. The first time I was in Hungary. This is quite a few years ago. And you go in communist countries, the tour guy, you go on a bus tour of Budapest or Warsaw or whatever, and the bus guys were all trained operatives, Communist Party apparatchiks. And they're not sort of dum-dums like you have in the United States, and they know the name of the square. They're highly trained, intelligent apparatchiks. So this bus tour guy was giving us this. You go to the main square in Budapest, where Attila the Hun, the statues of the great heroes in Hungary, like Attila the Hun, I kid you not. Let's have Attila the Hun revisionism here. Anyway, you go to the square, you see these guys hanging around up to no visible good of the square, and the bus guy says, don't talk to these evil men because they sell you counterfeit currency. What they're really doing, of course, is selling you black market forints, Hungarian currency, at a much better rate you can get in government rate. The interesting thing is they were there. I mean, the government had not stamped them out. There was an open, visible black market. And the tour guide was just saying, these are bad men, they'll sell you counterfeits. The next time I was in Hungary, that was last year, 4 or 5 years after that, the tour guide was, from the beginning we sat down on the bus until the end, the guy was attacking the government. And the entire time, the hooks and tyrants, communism is no good. I mean, the whole time, it just constant stream. It was just magnificent. And Hungary, the whole thing, nobody, they're sitting around discussing about that there's a multi-party system coming up. Most of the parties refuse to even put socialism on the platform. No, we're against socialism. And they're negotiating with the government. The government said, can't we put in socialism, freedom within socialism? No, toss it out. And Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania, Estonian communists are now in favor of private property rights, free markets. I mean, the whole bit, extremely limited government. The whole thing is, I mean, everything is totally collapsing. It's just great. In Poland, I was Poland twice. The first time, this was a conference organized by English conservatives, English conservative, semi-libertarian conservatives, I guess you'd call them. And in Poland, this is about 4 years, I guess 4 years ago. And it was a conference. It was very intellectually very free. The tour guide, was an obvious Communist Party spy. I'm quite sure everybody knew it. Okay, and at the conference, the guy was. I mean, tour guide usually was sitting on scholarly papers, right? He was sitting in every conference, paying particular attention to all the Poles. He didn't care about us. We were this capitalist pig, didn't that. Didn't care about Americans or British. The Poles are all out. They all denounced the government from the beginning of the conference to the end. All evil. And the Polish intellectuals, the spectrum was from dissident Marxists to Catholic traditionalists to libertarians. Okay, and they were constantly, they were just denouncing the government from pillar to post. And they read my stuff, they read me, they read everybody in Poland, just great. And the next year after that, second year, same thing, except I saw the dissident Marxists are gone. You're left with the traditionalists and the libertarian. So I asked one of the guys, where are the Marxists? And I said, we don't need them this year. So in the previous year, they used them as a cover so the government could allow the conference. By the next year, which is like 2 years ago, they didn't need the cover anymore. And the tour guide was not a Soviet agent. The whole thing was there were no agents anymore. The whole thing was obviously much freer than it was before. So, as a matter of fact, the end of talking about the first year in Poland, when there was a Soviet agent there, I mean, a government agent there, at the end of the final banquet, the director of the conference, he said, I hereby raise a toast. I hope nobody misunderstands the meaning of this or something. My toast is to a free, sovereign, and Catholic Poland. Everybody toasted, including the government agent, the communist agent. We were trying to toast to it. At any rate, the whole thing is just magnificent to see it, and a tremendous ferment. One of the things that I found very moving was, I forget whether this is Poland or Hungary. One of these countries is on television. It was a demonstration against the government a few months ago, and one of the people in the crowd was being interviewed by I guess an American station or whatever. And the guy said, please, people in the West, help us to give us a role model or something. Help us to destatize, is basically what he said. How do we desocialize? How do we get out of this stuff? Everybody wants to get rid of the government. Everybody wants to get rid of government control and all the rest of it. And the interesting thing, which sort of ticks me off is, we've had 40 years now of think tanks, right-wing foundations, scholarly research grants, and all the rest of it. Must be millions of dollars poured into this stuff. And nobody, not one of them has said, how does the communist government destatize? Supposing they say, okay, we read Mises, we read Friedman or whatever it is, and we come to the conclusion the whole thing doesn't work. How do we destatize? It's blank out, nothing, right? I mean, so much resources are going into how many nuclear food waste we should have. Nobody said, well, how do they get rid of the goddamn thing? And not one piece of research was going into that. I mean, Milton Friedman had an interesting article in Newsweek about 10 years ago. One of the ways to destatize is give everybody a share in TBA. You wake up in the morning, here's a share of TBA, which you can now negotiate. Well, that's one way to do it, but the thing is, very few people thought about this. How do you do it? How do you take this whole rotten government-owned control system and destatize it? And one of the reasons for this, and one of the reasons why personally for the big break between libertarians and conservatives many years ago, is the conservative view is this could never happen. You can never have destatization. The conservative doctrine is, and this is, I think, the fundamental error of conservatism, this whole thing, is that once a country becomes communist, that's it. It's like a black hole. It disappears from history because part of a satanic monolith. Okay? Well, now it turns out they're wrong. It's not a black hole. People have erupted. The whole thing is imploding, exploding, and whatever. And so conservatives not yet adjusted to this this new situation. Some of them have. It's very interesting how you see conservatives on television. Some of them say, hey, there's no more Cold War. There's no more, what is it? The whole thing is falling apart. And this, and that's another, I think, interesting aspect of all this, is that an implication for American politics, and is that if there's no more communism is falling apart, there's no so-called communist threat, what's the point of a Cold War? Why do you have these 2,800 missiles, whatever the hell it is? Why do we have to spend umpteen $1 trillion on missile programs and military industrial complex? Why indeed? And so this creates a whole new political situation in the United States, which is bound to continue and get more intense. It's a whole change of realignment, ideological realignment, everything else, coming from the fact that communism is disappearing and cracking up, and the Cold War threat is therefore over. And it will take quite a while, because there's a vested interest in it, for people to realize it. And oddly enough, Zbigniew Brzezinski is one of the few people. I mean, I have very little use for Zbigniew, but one of the few people who's really sort of seen this. He's written a book called The Death of Communists. But a few people realize this whole thing is over. I mean, this whole thing is a fundamental change in current history. And it was kind of amusing. The New York Times, which does not often go in for humor. Those of you who are familiar with a good gray New York Times, and except for Russell Baker's column, there's almost nothing ever funny in this very stately publication. And they actually had a funny article. I mean, I think consciously funny. I think New York Times about a year ago, and this reporter was investigating or dealing with what's known as the foreign policy community, a lovely term. All the guys who live off government grants, consulting fees, and all that, to study throughways and foreign geopolitics and foreign policy and all that. And they were worried about maybe the Cold War is over. What's going to happen in the foreign policy community? There ain't no more war. Okay. So they've had many conferences on this, as you can imagine. It's at swanky hotels all over the world. They're trying to figure out, are the good times over for the foreign policy community? And they've concluded, nah, don't worry about it, because there's always something. There's always the Ayatollah, of course he's now dead. There's always some threat somewhere which we can manufacture or help along or whatever, highlight, put it that way, and keep this whole damn thing going. Keep the whole military-industrial scam going. So apparently they relax, at least to some extent. But it's phenomenal. I mean, the whole thing is phenomenal. And I think even the Ayatollah force has now died. Find somebody. There's always Colonel Gaddafi to dig out. Of course, poor Colonel Noriega, for whom I have sort of a sneaking admiration, because he seems to be holding fast, even despite all the entire weight of the United States hysteria. He's still there. At any rate, it'd be very difficult to continue this for a long period of time, trying to get terrible satanic threats out of somebody like Noriega. This is somehow doesn't really work. Doesn't run up the flag on that. But the other thing, I mean, even in China, before this terrible situation, even in China, a fascinating thing happened. This is shortly before the crisis broke out. There was two interesting things happens in 1 week. It just so happened, it was a coincidence over 1 week. The Mises Institute, from which I'm located and I have I'm vice president of, which is of course a straight laissez faire outfit, got a message from the Chinese embassy in Washington that they wanted, with all the works of Ludwig von Mises, they want to figure out how to desocialize. Okay, and I mean, who else is reading works of Ludwig von Mises? Certainly not the U.S. government. So they want to read Ludwig von Mises. They want to read my stuff. They want to read stuff how to desocialize. Okay, they want to read about socialism. In the meantime, that same week, is a little AP dispatch from China. The Chinese government is worried because over the last 2 or 3 years, 1,800 tax collectors have been beaten up and killed in China. So the masses are rising up, and the first thing to do is get the goddamn tax collector. So, and even with the terrible situation in China, you have these poor guys on television, and of course there's the whole thing is a fantastic situation. And they keep saying to the reporters, don't worry, the People's Army can't shoot the people. I mean, it seemed to them like an elementary situation. How can the People's Army shoot the people? Well, of course, it turned out the People's Army didn't shoot the people. And what the lesson of all this is, of course, is there ain't no such thing as a People's Army or a People's Government, right? The people and the government are different. And I think they've unfortunately learned the lesson from the massacre. But I mean, the thing is that All the myths of socialism and collectivism, economic myths, ideological myths, all the rest of us are falling apart. They're becoming evidently crazy and ridiculous. Evidently, the emperor's clothes are being stripped off the emperor. So, and what's happening, as I say, is the Marxists have always said, when our Marxists are great analysts of revolution, they're interested in the revolution. How do they work? How do they not work? How do they win? And all that. And the Marxists have said for a long time is that no ruling class will ever voluntarily give up their power, okay, which is very true, except if the ruling class loses its will to power. Something happens to the ruling elite. They begin to crack. And what happened in Russia in 1917, there weren't that many Bolsheviks around. How did they take over? It's a huge country. It had a big state apparatus, a big secret police, and all the rest of it, which essentially the communists just took over and expanded. How do they lose? Well, they lost because, for one thing, the ruling elite lost its will to power. They didn't know what the hell to do. They had a big war on their hands, which they were losing. They were losing the war. There were soldiers who were leaving the front, shooting their officers and walking home all over Russia. This is World War I. And the Russian government and all the Russian political parties except the Bolsheviks were committed to continuing the war forever. Really an insane commitment. We have to fight German imperialism. That's it. And so with this situation, with this commitment to continue, they didn't know what the heck to do. They were losing the war. They didn't know how the legitimacy was being questioned. They essentially quit. Essentially, big sections of the ruling elite hived off. And the same thing is happening in the communist system right now. So the communist leadership doesn't know what to do. They say this whole thing is hopeless, and we quit. Interesting thing is there's some very interesting articles which I recommend on this whole thing. Timothy Garton Ash, who's an English free market person, writes for the Spectator in England, also writes for the New York Review of Books on Hungary and Poland. Those were his two areas of expertise. There were a very interesting article about 2 weeks ago, I think the last issue. And he just came back from Hungary and Poland. Even he was excited by, because he's on top of the situation. He was amazed at what's happening. And one of the things is the ruling elite in Hungary, for example, realized the whole thing is shot. Statism doesn't work. They want to get out of this. They want to surrender. They want to get out of it, however, without getting their throats cut, and also maintaining some economic privileges. And they want to become capitalists. They want to smooth the transition between socialism and capitalism and keep some of their perks. That's essentially what they want to do, the nomenclatura, okay? They're trying to find, these negotiations are going on in Poland and Hungary, essentially negotiations, how to do that, how to let these guys go off the hook, get them out of power. They'll find a way to do it. I mean, there's no precedent for this. As one of the, I think, Hungarian officials said, look, there's plenty of, and if you read the political science textbooks, there's plenty of lessons on how difficult it is to achieve power, like gain power. But there's no textbook discussion of how to give up power. How do you give it up? How do you smoothly give it up? What do you do? What are the processes of doing it? Or as one of the Russian and Polish jokes now, political jokes circulating in Russia and Poland is what's the longest way? But what's the longest route? What's the longest route to capitalism? And the answer is the longest route from capitalism to socialism and back to capitalism. That's the longest route, which is the route they're pursuing at the present time. So we have, in other words, a fantastically exciting situation we're in. We're facing a 21st century which bids promise to be the century of freedom, in contrast to the 20th century, the century of socialism. And that means for the domestic front, to get down to domestic politics, it means that we have a tremendous opportunity for libertarianism. And we face a situation, just so happens, coincidental of history, we face an American political scene where the beloved leader, the president, is no longer a charismatic, narcotizing figure in American politics. I mean, we had 8 years of Reagan, miserable years as far as I'm concerned, and 8 years of a total blight. It's where everybody loved Reagan, everybody, with the exception of myself, were crazy about Reagan. Crazy about Reagan. Anything he did was great, and he floated above the political scene, sort of showering blessings on everybody, and they all loved it. And so it's a miracle the Libertarian Party, survived through the age of Reagan. It's a miracle because everything else. And we shouldn't gripe about the fact we haven't got that many votes anymore. How would we survive? That's great. So nice. So now we have George Bush. Nobody loves George Bush, with possible exception of his family. And he's not a charismatic figure, not narcotizing anybody. And the whole thing is now erupting. I mean, I think Bush was in power for 1 week when he had a magnificent talk show host, anti-government raise revolution. It was magnificent. It was just great. These bastards want to give themselves a raise. Congress, top government officials, judges, They deserve a raise. My goodness, they haven't had a raise in 8 years. Terrible thing. You know, they're only getting $800,000, $100,000 a year now. It should be getting, you know, double that or whatever. So, and it was smoothly going through. They wouldn't have a vote on. They had a phony bipartisan commission set up. One thing, by the way, one of my least favorite things in politics are bipartisan commissions. And watch out for them. There's always both parties are going to pick your pocket and end them. So the bipartisan commission, oh yes, we need how can you attract good people in government if you don't give them a big raise? Who wants good people in government? Good people should be in the private sector, helping us out, helping themselves out in the private sector, being productive. We want schmoes in government. We want people. We want people who can't find the doorknob. Why waste productive people as well as, you know, looting the taxpayer? So it was all going to go through very smooth. Everybody loved it. Reagan was for, Bush was for, everybody. The whole establishment, all the pundits, liberal, conservative, all the rest of it. And suddenly the masses erupt. The talk show host movement erupts. You bastard, you voted yourself a pay raise. How dare you? Vote yourself a pay raise at our expense. It was a simple, dramatic. And in the early 19th century, by the way, I forget the year, it was some 1830s or something like that, Congress voted itself a pay raise. I mean, it's small, teeny pay raise. My God, we can hardly see it now. And they all kicked out of the next election. It's an uprising, a bipartisan uprising of the public. How dare you guys vote yourself a pay raise at our expense? How dare you? And bingo, they're all out. And this happens. It's a great thing. It touches the interesting thing is the public choice school of economics, a distinguished free market school, is totally can't understand this at all. The public choice school is the special interest will always win. They got to win because who cares about one lousy pay rate? It's only a drop of the bucket. If Congress gives itself a 50% pay rate, it's nothing compared to the, you know, $2 trillion, whatever it is in the budget. But people people ignore the public choice economists. No, how dare you guys vote yourself a pay rate? And people erupted. It was just great. So that was that. There was also another eruption that took place about the same week, I think. Another eruption of mass libertarian sentiment against the proposed tax. If you remember, they didn't call it a tax, of course, because it violated Bush's no tax increase pledge. It was a fee increase for having a bank deposit. You have a bank deposit, you pay 25 cents on $100 fee, quote unquote, to the government. That didn't fly either. In fact, that was shot down in 4 hours. It's just magnificent. I mean, I remember it was proposed at 10 in the morning by Secretary of Treasury Brady as a trial balloon floated. How about a fee? By 2 o'clock, I think it was, the crossfire, whatever was on, it says, all shot, it's all dead. Both Democrats, were conservative, liberal, whatever, dead. Finish? They better not talk about it against the radio of their political life. That was it. 4 hours, the eruption against the so-called fee increase. The same thing happened, by the way, even in the Reagan administration, in the proposed tax on withholding tax on interest and dividends. That was killed by the same sort of public eruption. So now we have the basic libertarian sentiment of much of the public is now free to move again, free to act and do stuff because they're removed from the Reagan blight. And they're free to express themselves. And also you've got some hot topics here. You've got, for example, it's called a $100 billion bailout. Every month is a $20 billion increase in the estimated cost of bailing out these rotten S&L banks, okay, which of course you have in Texas. You're on the forefront here in Texas, the cutting edge of bankrupt crooked S&Ls, okay? So bail them all out. This is ours, 120 billion. Who knows how many billion? Nobody's against it except libertarians, or I can say. So we have lots of issues to talk about, and the fact that socialism doesn't work is now shot. And in the midst of all these tremendous opportunities, domestic and foreign, and very anti-Cold War, all the rest of it, tremendous opportunities for freedom for the Libertarian Party. What is the National Libertarian Party doing about it? What inspirational words are coming from our beloved leadership in Washington, the National Libertarian Party leadership? What? I mean, were there any LP signs demonstrating with the Chinese students in New York or Washington? I mean, they're answering your own question. Of course not. Zip, zilch, nothing. Peanuts. Now, in the old days when I was on the National Committee, we didn't do a hell of a lot, but at least we passed resolutions, okay? Doesn't sound like much, but at least some attention was paid to what's going on in the world. NACOM met in D.C. Was there any statement of support? The Chinese thing was just erupting now. Was there any statement of support for the Chinese students for shouting for freedom and democracy? Was there any? No statement at all. All they did was knife Matt Monroe and other competent people on the back, or the front and back. So NatCom and that National Party, Libertarian Party leadership at a time of tremendous opportunity, real world opportunities for freedom. Real fantastic things are happening. Or what are they doing? They're playing their own petty rackets and vilifying competent people trying to get something done and have the party grow. So that's the situation. It's a situation of tremendous opportunity. Once again, tremendous real world opportunities for freedom and for libertarianism, and almost nothing being done on the concrete level by the party leadership. And I think a lot of good state parties. I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is the national leadership. And maybe something can be done in Philadelphia about it. I'm always hopeful about this. If we can kick out the Russian leadership and the Polish leadership, if Jaruzelski can suddenly become a liberal from being a monster repressor, there's even hope for the LP. Even hope for NatCom. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I don't know how long we've got here. Questions, comments? Yeah.
One thing that really surprised me in the news lately is the questioning of NATO, making front-page headlines.
Right.
As West Germany is questioning, the United States is going, wait, what is it?
Well, it's another interesting thing, by the way. Izvestia, one of the top Russian newspapers, just had a long article praising Ludwig Erhard and the Wirtschaftswunder in West Germany, the West German miracle, economic miracle, the free market, hard money miracle. It's basically what it was. And praising, saying, we should learn from that, et cetera. So it's fascinating stuff. It's another thing, by the way. Another thing I want to point out about Bush and versus the communist situation. Reagan said that Mr. Gorbachev tear down the wall in Berlin. A great statement. However, they've already torn down the barbed wire wall between Austria and Hungary. It's already down. Very few people commented on it. President Bush said, yes, they should tear down all the walls between Moscow and Bonn, right? That's great. What are we doing in Mexico? Where are the walls being torn down there, right? They're putting up barbed wire, shooting people, et cetera, right? So tear down the wall with President Bush. It's another thing, by the way, I should have mentioned this too on the domestic front. We have now, is that we found, William James said we should have a moral equivalent for war. So we have the same sort of collective spirit and quasi-fascism we have for war, we use for war to do for peace. Well, we're doing that now. We have the war against drugs. What I'm envisioning is we could take the whole military-industrial complex and shift it to attacking drugs. That's a war they can never win. It's perfect for their establishment. They'll never win it. So they can go on forever, tyrannizing over people, breaking down their doors, searching out their bank accounts. They'll never win the war against drugs. Perfect. And we have to do something about that too. We have to say, look, this is part of freedom too. Get rid of this drug fascism. We have a drug Führer in Washington, which everybody loves. Bill Bennett, beloved by the conservatives. Okay, so we'll see how Bennett will be. Bennett has not come out in favor of, by the way, on Larry King program. They asked him, he wants to enforce the war against drugs. Step up enforcement. They asked him, some guy calls in and said, I don't know if he was serious or sardonic. He said, what do you think of public beheading of drug dealers? That's a great idea. Yeah, he's all for it. Well, why stop at that? Why not have death by torture on public for all drug dealers and users? May as well lock up most, torture to death half the population. So the whole thing is so crazy, it's got to bust up. And we can be in the vanguard of that. If we only get off our tail, do something. Yeah, Mike?
Murray, how are these world events and the disillusionment with socialism, how does that impact on the last bastion of statist thinking, the academic community?
Well, it's interesting. They're kind of confused. Robert Heilbronner, the distinguished quasi-Marxist economist, wrote an article about 6 months ago saying the war between capitalism and socialism is over and capitalism is won, period. Okay, so the intelligence Marxists have given up. However, of course, that doesn't mean the statist threat is over, or quite the contrary. They're now shifting to another line of defense, namely interventionism. You have to keep capitalism, keep markets. Markets are good, at least in their place, okay? And have some kind of regulated, egalitarianized, whatever. In other words, the coming struggle will be, I'm not implying that we won, we have to relax. The coming struggle will be over interventionism, some kind of statism, quasi-fascism, whatever. In other words, but the actually full socialism has had it. Except I say from some professors who are still in there. Alexander Coburn, by the way, is a great writer. I wish he were a libertarian, great writer. But unfortunately, he's attacking Gorbachev for selling out the international communist movement. He's right in the sense. He has sold it out. Happily for us. But yeah.
What about the possibility or the worry of since the Soviet bloc is being destabilized, they might desperately think the last resort being start some kind of war, since their actual military apparatus is not is still as that.
Well, it's interesting because a friend of mine was talking to me about this. He said, well, it's funny. The Russian military is not resisting this at all. They're not championing any kind of old guard reaction. And the suspicion is, and we were talking about this, and our suspicion was the Russian military knows better than anybody else the whole damn Russian machine doesn't work either. I mean, just because, we know that socialism can't produce stuff, can't produce consumer goods. They also can't produce more stuff either. How can they be super klutzy in one area and super efficient in another? It just doesn't make much sense. There's a great book called Threat by Andrew Coburn, and it came out about 5-6 years ago. And he investigated Russian military stuff, and he says, it doesn't work. The whole thing's falling apart. The missiles don't fire. The whole thing is, and you could see with the Afghanistan situation facing Russia it was a hard thing. They had their own Vietnam and Afghanistan. They lost and they had to get the hell out. And it's a big lesson for the Russian military. They understand what's going on more than the other people do. So I don't think that's a problem at all because they want to get the hell out. Want up down. Yeah.
Do you see any line where the funny money is in the sense that they're the total collapse of not having a hard dollar or gold standard? It just seems like we keep on having trillions of dollars of debt and all the other things that are going on. And I keep on thinking every day that surely it's got to come to an end. I mean,
No, it's not that fast. Now, it's come to an end in Argentina where it's about 1,000% increase a month or something in inflation rate. And in many third world countries, it has come to an end. The currency is collapsing. In Russia and Hungary and Poland, they're trying to find ways of making the ruble a separate convertible. As a matter of fact, they're getting more and more hard money. As a matter of fact, in communist countries, one of the hallmarks of a communist country is a highly overinflated currency. In other words, the ruble is supposed to be worth 25 cents, is really worth a nickel or something. They keep the exchange rate very high. As a result, there's a big black market in currency. Okay, so as a result, if you go to a communist country being pestered constantly, you see you wear Western clothes on, you want dollars. You want, they give you 3 times or 4 times the amount. A black market rate. They don't want dollars anymore in Hungary because they now have they devalue the foreign to the black market level, almost black market level. So in other words, they're moving toward a free market currency and eventually convertible currency. They're talking about convertible currency, which means they're getting harder and harder, less and less inflationary. Of course, they have a long way to go yet, but they're moving strongly in that direction. As a matter of fact, I once asked Mises, my mentor, how do you say a country is either socialist or not? Obviously there's a spectrum going from complete freedom and complete totalitarianism. At what rate would you say a country is no longer socialist? He said, well, the key is if they have a stock market. If you have a stock market, you can't say they're socialist because there'd be a private ownership of capital goods. And of course, they're getting a stock market. They already have a small stock market in Poland, I think, Hungary, and they're getting bigger. And they're looking to have a more and more extensive one. And one thing is they want foreign capital, they want domestic capital for that matter, they want channels for saving. They're beginning to realize in the communist countries, if you want to do it, you have to have a stock market, you have to have also convertible currency. Nobody's going to invest and have a lot of foreign, so the foreign is worthless. They want dollars. So they want a currency convertible into dollars freely. And so they're moving rapidly toward that, having a harder money in a world market. So all this stuff is great. And as you say, the dollar, however, is getting worse. But it takes a long time. The dollar has a lot. I don't quote Milton Friedman very often, but one of the things he said is that capitalism has a lot of ruin in it. That's true. We have such a great productive economy. It will take a long time to get to a runaway inflation. I think eventually we'll get to it if we can watch out. But it takes a long time. We're right now creeping up to double digit, which is bad enough, but it's not the 1,000% yet.
I'm just wondering what is going to happen in Argentina. They've had an independence movement from the Spanish Empire. Had fascism, had civil war, they had a disastrous war, now they have their economy collapse. It's an expert.
I don't know. That's going to be pretty rugged because, what's happening is there's no, they don't use what's it, Austral. You don't use it anymore. Basically, try to use dollars or either actual physical dollars or also accounting in dollars. A lot of the reason why we didn't have as much inflation as quote should have had, unquote, during the mid-'80s, whereas a lot of the dollars actually went to third world countries to use as currency. So that siphoned off some of the excess dollars, so to speak. But that's one way to do it, and they obviously don't hang around using Australs. Exactly, it's got to the point in Argentina now where at the end of there's always a line for consumer goods. At the end of the line, the guy at the end of the line pays a lot more, a higher price than the guy at the beginning of the line. It's like reading about the German inflation of the 20s. It's horrible. So I don't know how this thing is going to be resolved there. The thing is, unfortunately, what happens is each group wants to get their own advantage in this thing. One thing that's happening in Russia, for example, is if the economists in Russia realize they have to have a free market, they eliminate price control. However, of course, there's a big excess of money over goods because they're keeping the prices, consumer goods way below the free market level. And they realize they should eliminate price control. They said, gee, if we do that, there'll be a big increase in prices. The public won't like it. Well, that's it. I mean, so they're stuck now with a system with no shortages and corruption. And the reason there's a lot of corruption in China, for example, is that they have price controls way below the free market level. And in order to get the goods, you have to pay off some government official. That all will come to an end with a free price system. So that the combination of the public not liking its immediate increase in prices, plus the corruptionists not liking their brutal cutoff, the limit is restricting it. But it's inevitable. It's going to happen. See, what's happening in communist countries is Mises talks about the interventionist mindset. In other words, the interventionist mindset, which we're all familiar with, all too familiar with here, is if there's some problem will happen, some social problem. The immediate answer is, okay, a government should pass a law curing the problem. The next step is the problem is not cured. Other problems pop up as a result of the government intervention. And so the next step, the next cry is, okay, we should have more intervention. The government should solve problems X, Y, and Z. There's a move towards socialism by the inner logic of trying to cure problems which the controls themselves set up. Well, in communist countries, the mindset is now the other way around. They say, there's still a lot of problems. There's inflation, there's a lot of subsidy. What do we get rid of? What government measures do we get rid of? How can we make freedom work so the whole thing will solve these problems? There's a progressive spiral toward freedom instead of a spiral toward government intervention, toward socialism. That's because they've had it with socialism. They already had socialism, and they hate it. They know that doesn't work, and how it's rotten. So they're moving toward freedom. That's a great mindset to be in. It's super. It started off with Yugoslavia back in the 60s and 50s, actually. Started the move from communism to freedom. Unfortunately, they got caught up with co-ops, with workers' co-ops, and they got stuck with that. And then Tito came in and crushed the co-ops. You have all the whole ethnic national problem, which I haven't had a chance to go into, which creates opportunities and problems for them, because the whole imperium began to fall apart. The whole multinational imperium that constitutes Yugoslavia and Russia, etc. But anyway, these are all complicating factors. But the thing is, they now have the mindset: what do we have to get rid of to have the system work? Yeah.
What do you think about the so-called conspiracy theory in national cycle to that far all that?
Conspiracy theory? Well, I mean, they're conspiracy. I mean, the thing is, the term conspiracy is a loaded term, because when other guys, if 3 or 4 guys sit in a room and do something, plan something which I don't like, I can call it a conspiracy. I only have 3 or 4 people sit in a room and plan something I do like, I'll call it that's a great solidarity for noble action, okay? So the guys I don't like are always conspirators. So the term is not a useful term, let's put it that way. But I think obviously there are link-ups. I mean, if we can put it very simply, if you see the Congress, let's say, passes a steel import quota. Now, there's several options. Let's say you don't know anything about why they passed it. You haven't been following the steel question for a while. Well, you could say, well, they passed the steel import quota because Congress suddenly realized in their wisdom that something has to be done for steel. Or, they see, gee, there's not enough steel domestic steel, we have to do something for the domestic steel producers. Or you say, well, I guess the goddamn steel industry has lobbied for it. Okay? If you said the latter, you'd be right. You check on it, you find out, yes, indeed, they have lobbied for it. So if you want to call it a conspiracy, you can do it, but I prefer to call it realistic analysis of what's happening. Right? You look for who benefits, and you check out, well, did they really push for it? They did. Then you can say this. But I think, by the way, it's important for libertarians to realize that the 2 problems here with statism, one is intellectual error, which obviously it's filled with intellectual error, and we know all that, and we're familiar with it. We can say, for example, the price control causes shortages, maximum price control. On the other hand, there's also venality here. The price control causes shortages, but it means that the guys in with the government can then ration the scarce good. They can boodle out of it. And we can point that out too. These guys are ripping us off. So in other words, there's 2 things going on with statism. It's intellectual error, and it's ripping us off. These SOBs are ripping us off, and they're living off tax money, living off subsidies and privileges. We should point that out, because it also gets the people hung under the collar. They realize the source of their problem, which is not just intellectual error. It is intellectual error. It's also off-ripping, okay? And we should be armed with both sets of arguments. Yeah.
How do you view the coming integration of the European economies?
No, that's interesting. It's kind of a mixed bag, because first the press, the media hoops it up as being a great thing because it's like a giant free trade area, free market area, which in a sense it is. It'd be supposedly free movement of capital and labor and goods within Europe. The problem is, however, they're also building up the giant bureaucracy of Brussels. They're also interfering, means more statism within the countries. I mean, for example, the countries in Europe which have low tax levels are being urged by the Brussels establishment to increase their taxes so as to equalize them with other countries, let's say. So you have a tax increasing stuff, plus you have a very dangerous situation, namely the European monetary unit with the European Central Bank looming up. A European Central Bank, of course, is much worse than having no European, just having 8 or 7 or 8 central banks. It's much worse to have one giant central bank, which is an inflationary cartel of the whole European structure, plus the fact the Keynesians are still in power. Okay, for the Keynesian dream, and Secretaries Baker and Brady, or Brady, probably find the shoelace. I mean, Baker is a Keynesian. Okay, it's a Keynesian government, and so what they want, the Keynesian dream, is to have the great objective from Keynes down is to have one world central bank and one world monetary unit, which can be issued by the central bank, one world paper money. And then you have a world reserve bank issuing world paper, and then everybody can inflate together. You won't have any problems with losing gold, losing dollars, worrying about exchange rates. Everybody will inflate together, have one world inflation. They manage, of course, brilliantly by the world economists. And then, of course, you have there'll be a one world runaway inflation, which would be really horrendous, much worse than the Argentinian runaway inflation. So that's the Keynesian dream, is have one managed world currency and one managed world central bank. I don't think they'll get it because there's a lot of national sovereignty jealousies here. But I mean, that's always the threat. So the threat of a united Europe is to have a European central bank. Unfortunately, Mrs. Thatcher is against it, probably because she had monetarist economic advisors. The one good thing about monetarism, they're opposed to a Keynesian world central bank. So anyway, that's the... So it's sort of a mixed bag, you know. It's good in some sense and bad in others. Yeah.
Let me ask you, during all the presidents we've had in the United States history, which one do you think's the best?
The best, the Greenspan. Well, my favorite is Martin Van Buren. He was great. Martin Van Buren was a Jacksonian. He was a Jacksonian minus the military adventurism of Jackson. Jackson was a general, so he tended to go and crush the Indians, crush the British, and that sort of stuff. And whereas Van Buren was pro-peace. He was a laissez-faire liberal. He was a favor of hard money, total separation of government from money, from banking, from almost everything. And very smart. And he also was one of the few people in politics who was able to maneuver and yet do it on a basis of principle. It's very difficult, of course, to do it, as we know in the LP even. How do you, when you don't have much power, okay? How do you maintain your principles and not sell out and all that, and yet be able to maneuver and screw your opposition and things like that? He was able to do it. It was just great. A marvelous role model, it seems to me, for real-world politics. I mean, see, the thing is, most libertarian historians, when they go back, they look at Lysander Spooner, if you like that. Of course, are great. I love Lysander Spooner. On the other hand, we should also look at politicians. Were there any really good politicians who were able to maneuver within the system and make it better? Van Buren was an outstanding example. Jefferson was great, except when he was in power. When in power, of course, he totally sold out. Before he got into power and after he was in power, he was great. But Van Buren was pretty good even in power. He concluded peace with Britain at a time when there was a big sentimental war with Britain. Generally, it was terrific. He was weak on the Indian question, must admit. Almost everybody was weak on the Indian question, unlibertarian Indian question. But anyway, that was so I think Van Buren by far the best, my favorite. And there's not too much after that. There's Grover Cleveland's first term wasn't too bad. So Cleveland, you see, was in favor of the Interstate Commerce Commission. That was his big deviation. So it's a tough, it's a tough situation. I was thinking, in the 20th century, my favorite, of course, was Warren Harding, kind of a lovable character. Even though he's a protectionist, he didn't do a hell of a lot, playing poker and all that sort of things. I mean, that's descending from Van Buren's loftier eminence. But, yeah, back there.
This morning one of the speakers told that you endorsed LBJ for presidency.
No, and I hadn't endorsed them. I know. I
True in this so long.
What's that?
I just want to know if that was true or not in so long.
No, I hadn't endorsed them. I was a question of who do you cheer for? I mean, I'm a big political buff, and so I want to know when election night comes, who am I in favor of, who am I against? In that sense, I was in favor of Johnson over Goldwater. I think just purely on the war question. And it's true for then we have Vietnam. On the other hand, see, the problem is I knew a lot of the Goldwater advisors, and I thought they were totally crazy, and they wanted to nuke Russia. I mean, I figured, Johnson was better than that. So yeah, it's a question of, I mean, lesser of the two evils hardly sums it up. But anyway, no, that was, I think foreign policy to me was the key question. There was not much difference in any other key issue. Yeah.
From around the street that did that. And I believe your letter to Innovator in like September 64.
Yeah.
To Carol Leach, Innovator, who said that you were going to vote for Johnson and that you thought all libertarians should vote for Johnson.
Yeah.
That's not an endorsement, was it?
Well, I mean, it wasn't a positive endorsement. It was a, and the contrast.
Sure, yeah, and you did explain it was entirely on foreign policy matters. That's it. You know, what he did, the kind of little attack at Goldwater.
Yeah, no, I got
billionaire, but libertarian on
It's
domestic.
contrast to go with. Funny, my big political acts in that year, '64. I realized that many libertarians here were started as libertarians in the Goldwater camp, favored Goldwater. We have to realize the older generation. I left the Republican Party when Taft was robbed of the nomination in '52. Say, but at any rate, I spoke before a group of libertarian Georgists. These were old Chodorovians. These were guys who were followers of Chodorov. I think at that time was either dead or incapacitated. And these are guys who were Chodorovian anarchists. They had never voted on principle. They were sort of like Lefebvrians. That's they had never voted for any election. They voted all evil. And I was taking the anti-Goldwater position. I wouldn't say pro-Johnson. I said anti-Goldwater position. Okay, and they started shaking their canes at me and saying that, by cracky, I haven't voted in 50 years. I'm going to go out and vote for Barry Goldwater after hearing this. It was not very effective. Stump speech. So, no, it's true. I thought he was balmy on the war question. That was the issue that I thought was the key. Because if you have nuclear war, all the other problems sort of fade away. Price control, all that sort of fears as a problem, et cetera. Yeah.
What would you like to see happen with the National Committee now for the Libertarian Party?
Well, I think it really needs a big reformation. It needs a transformation. We need, as Mike says in his editorial today, we need a perestroika as well as glasnost in the Libertarian Party. We need to air the situation and then find out what the hell's going on, and to a real transformation. First of all, get rid of the goddamn National Committee. There are 30, how many people are in the National Committee? 33 or something. As Mike pointed out today in this editorial, I think there's one National Committee member for every 200 members, 30 members, what is it? Something like that. I mean, it's totally insane. They have more committees and they have as many board members as General Motors, so probably more committees come on board. It's ridiculous. They have 4 employees and 33 board members. Shafts the opposition and all that, but then when you get a functioning board, it's supposed to be able to work together. It's supposed to manage the national office, national party. They can't do it if they constantly stab each other in the back and say, people can work effort. You can't do it with the current structure of the National Committee and the current personnel. That's the problem. See, another problem, you have all these functionaries who've been around for 30 years. Since the beginning of a party, it's like, if you go to one of these conventions like Old Home Week, I mean, it's like, yeah, I remember you from the 54, not 54, 70, 68, and that sort of stuff. Well, that's fine. I'm not against nostalgia. But you need new people, for Christ's sake. You need more people, new people. People are not kind of preserve their own little power center and their little perks. I mean, the problem is the Libertarian Party is also perks. You wouldn't think there's perks and patronage. It's a very low level of perks. Very low level. But they'll cut their grandmother's throat for $50. Oh, they pay. So you need to get out of this whole thing, and really get back to the ideas of liberty, which started the whole thing. It's a tough situation. It's true in many organizations. A non-profit organization, things like that, they tend to descend into really, the end becomes not the output, which is liberty or whatever it is, but the end becomes keeping your own salaries going, your own perks going. So you try to get out of that. One thing it needs is some kind of a reformation every once in a while. Cleansing of every Orgian stable. And boy, they need it now. They really do. It's really rugged. Yeah. I don't know.
Why does it make the most of the best quality of
No, why they make best quality? I think they're certainly definitely free market oriented. I wouldn't say it's hard to compare. I think Switzerland is very free market oriented. They're doing great. Switzerland has almost no unemployment and no inflation. I mean, Japan is having an inflation problem, but basically I think Japan is largely free market. And many of the stuff that you heard about Japan is a myth. Like the ideas of, well, they have a social security from cradle to grave and that sort of stuff. That's really true of the Mitsubishi Group, which really the old firms. They're not the firms that are the firms we all know about and love, Sony and all that, or Honda and stuff. But these are young progressive firms that don't have this kind of welfare mentality. These are much more free market oriented, innovator oriented. So no, I think it's great. I mean, they also work hard, and also, you know, it's fantastic. You know, they don't have the idea to screw the bosses at every opportunity. They're much more cooperative. They realize that if the company does better, they'll do better. And also very smart. I mean, just great. I mean, I only buy Japanese electronics stuff, you know, consumer electronics. And I said, gee, this is an American firm. The salesman will say, no, it's made by Japan. It's just the label of with CNES or whatever on it. Don't worry about it. So anyway, so no, I think it's great. But it's stuff. And also, they haven't got the military machine on their neck. They don't have to spend a huge see, the military problem, not just the percentage of national product that goes to the military, it's also in the scientists and the brain power that goes into the military stuff, which they don't have to worry about. They can have scientific brain power to electronics and, you know, consumer goods, and not the more and better, prettier missiles. You know, so that's a big thing. It liberates the whole Japanese society that way. First, it was imposed, ironically enough, by the United States. We're very mad now. We impose the Constitution and preventing any kind of army. Yeah, we're trying to get out of it, you know, but we're trying to get the. Yeah, we impose it, sure. And then we try to the United States foreign policy is a constant swiveling of, you know, trying to backtrack in your own position. My God, we got ourselves locked in the Canada of Japanese army. So, yeah, Micah, yeah.
Murray, assuming that George Bush dominates the Republican politics for the next few years, but do you have any speculations on who the Democrats might turn to take them out of the wilderness?
Sure, good Lord, it's hard. Who knows? And Democrats even have a unique capacity for harakiri on a presidential level. They managed to pick somebody who's a total loser, and I don't know. And it's also peculiar why they keep doing that. I mean, you think they're a brainy group, but so I don't know who they'll turn to. I have no real insight on that. I mean, I say one clunk after the other. It's difficult to know who. Maybe Jim Wright is a heroic figure. Yeah.
What do you think of Ellen Greenspan?
Well, I think, you know,
I'd go for being at least study under me, just and little didn't he take some seminar? You know, answer abandoning the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, yeah. That's very interesting. Greenspan, he's always a Keynesian, even in the old Randian period. Yeah, and he had no interest in Austrian economics at all, and no interest in economic theory. He was basically a forecaster. He was a lousy forecaster, interestingly enough. When he got his Fed post a couple of years ago, he had to give up his forecasting business because the forecasting firm Townsend Greenspan admitted they were lousy forecasters, and so without Greenspan, there's no point in having it. The reason, in other words, what Greenspan's soul is not his forecasting, but his access to power. Like Kissinger, why Kissinger's associates make $10 million a year or whatever it is? Because he knows all these big shots and can get them in with the big shots and sort of stuff. That's highfalutin lobbying. And so, how did he rise to fame and fortune? I don't quite know. I mean, I've met Greenspan, and he's the least charismatic person I've ever seen, practically. He's got the persuasiveness of a dead mackerel. So I don't know how he got. It's difficult to figure out. He got in with, and I guess the Ford administration, and the interesting thing is when he got in as Council of Economic Advisors and recently of the Fed, the New York Times will write about him and say, well, he had this peculiar philosophical views like gold standard and Ayn Rand, et cetera, but don't worry about it, folks. He's really a pragmatist. That's the tip-off. Regardless, these views are sort of in the closet. He doesn't care about them. In practice, he's like everybody else, which of course is true. But he also has he has the advantage for the establishment of having conservative or Randian or whatever aura. So he can get away with stuff for conservative will back him. And so he can do the same stuff everybody else is doing and has a sort of an aura, some kind of a right-wing connection. I think that's probably the usefulness. But basically he's like Volcker or the other people. If he's a Volcker without a cigar, that's where he is. And so he's probably better than a lot of the other guys. The interesting thing now, the Keynesians, conservative Keynesians like Volcker and Greenspan are better on the Reaganite supply side is want more inflation. They want a lot more inflation, a lot lower interest. So they're holding a line such as it is. It's too bad because Greenspan, of course, saved the so-called Social Security system for a century by increasing taxes, of course. So he has a lot to answer for. Contrast to less bad than the Reaganites. That's all you can say for him. But see, it's the interesting thing. He follows the Randian strategic view. The Randian strategic view is, most people think of Randy as being libertarian with a slight quirk. They're not really libertarians politically at all, because what they want is everybody, before you can do anything politically, before you can, cut taxes or eliminate price control or anything, before you do anything, you have to have everybody agree on Randian philosophy, free will and concept and percept and all the other crap, right? So before you can do anything, have any coalition, anybody, you have to have everybody agree on all the Randian metaphysics. Well, since you're not going to have that, in practice, you have just regular statists. Yeah.
Do you favor an Constitution amendment with a balanced budget? Do you favor a balanced budget?
I'm in favor of balanced budget. I'm not in favor of a constitutional amendment because it's a racket. It's see, the way the constitutional amendment, it's the same thing as Graham-Rudman, which is also a racket. The way that's structured is the Congress has to balance not the actual budget, but the prospective budget, the budget as forecast by Congress. Okay, so in other words, anybody can forecast anything. I can sit down and forecast, next year we'll have a GNP of 200 billion or something. Who cares? What difference does it make? So you can balance, anybody can balance a prospective, a future budget. It's only the past budget that's the problem. Last year's or this year's budget, current budget. They don't have to balance that. All they have to do is to have phony figures to balance the estimates. That's what they do at Graham-Rudman. They never meet the Graham-Rudman targets. Because somehow it turns out, we spent $50 billion more than we thought we were last year. Okay. So that's the problem. You see, the balanced budget amendment, to be really effective, would have to require Congress to balance this year's or last year's budget, not the estimated budget. How about that? Balance the real budget. But to do that, of course, you have to have an enforcement clause. What do you do when Congress violates this balanced budget amendment? You shoot them all? You lock them up? Interesting. So that would be a real balanced budget amendment. The rest of it is phony. Yeah, Phil.
Are you familiar with the Brazilian method or the Bolivian method of balancing your budget? They passed a law that said the treasurer sign all checks or expenditures to Bolivian dollars. And he could, on any given day, sign more checks than they took in that day. Now, this is had the effect of doing something that people have been maintaining is impossible in Latin America, mainly knocking out the inflation instantly.
Because they had a runaway inflation a year or two ago.
9 or 10 months, the inflation rate has gone from something in the thousands of percent down to about 8 or 9%.
Oh, great.
And I wonder, it strikes me as maybe that's the solution, a different kind of balance. As a saying, literally a day by day. That's the total amount. Can't overdraw the check.
That's interesting. That might be good. Also, you have to have no evasion clause. Another stuff that Congress can override with a 2/3 vote. And in case of war or national emergency, you got to cut all that stuff out and require concurrent or immediate balanced budget. That might work, yeah.
Put everything on budget.
Yeah, that's another thing. You have to have, all they do is have this SNL bailout, not because it'd be off budget item. At least that's what Bush wants, off budget. You have to have everything on budget, exactly. It's tough to enforce all this stuff. You have to make sure the post office is going to be on budget, Social Security, the whole business. It's tough to really ride her on these people, and they've got all the personnel, you got all the agencies and all the rest of it. Yeah.
Instead of a balanced budget amendment, a gold standard amendment, wouldn't that be a disrespect?
Oh yeah, I'm in favor of everything. Gold standard. Also another thing is balanced budget with no increase in expenditures. You can't have no increase in taxes. It's important not to balance the budget on the backs of the taxpayer. So you require no increase in taxes. The whole thing has to be copper riveted. It's going to be tough to do it. Yeah, and the gold standard for us is very, very important. In other words, there are two ways in which the government gets money, federal government. One is taxes, and the other is by creating money, printing money, in essence. So we have to take both arms away from it, or reduce it as much as possible. Reduce the tax stuff, and reduce the deficit, the borrowing arm, which would rest on the other two, and reduce the money printing potential. So a gold standard would be a great way of doing it. That allows them to have the paper unit, this little piece of rag paper, used to call it, and crummy paper, badly designed, dirty paper, and called money. It should be some commodity like gold, which would be a market commodity. Now, all this is important. Yeah, that's a key thing. Yeah.
Would you care to comment on the fact that the Soviet Union seems to be more inclined to allow recently free state, whereas China was more inclined to allow market activity, and China is more free?
Yeah, as it says, they both beginning realizing you can't have one without the other. Russia's trying to do both. Russia, Poland, and Hungary are trying to do both free market and both glasnost and perestroika at the same time. They're doing better with glasnost, but the perestroika they have the vested interests trying to keep on. But they're trying to do both. When China tried to do the economic stuff without the political, and that the result is the current situation. And of course, they can't. How do you have free exchanges of students and all that? How do you get international exchange? How do you do it if you close down and repress everything? So they're going to find out and won't be able to keep up with the market modernization and all that without the free speech. I mean, they're going to find out pretty soon. Finding out right now, it really doesn't work. And as I say, in China, the thing is, see, in Russia, they've had for 30 more years of communism than China. I mean, Russia, they had communism since 1917, and China, they've had it since 46 or so, 47. So as a result, you have the founding generation still there. I mean, Deng Xiaoping, they say, is about 88 or something. All these guys in the upper 80s, they were all on a long march which established communism in the first place, which, of course, in Russia, that's all gone. I mean, Gorby is apparatchik, part of grew up within the system. He's not committed to the great struggles of 1917. Okay, so that's the difference is gerontocratic. That they're much older in China, so they're extremely long-lived. I've always thought that the best way to assure yourself a long life is to be a cardinal in the Roman Catholic Church, and now obviously be a Chinese communist official. If you aren't shot, of course. You're not shot, you live a long time. Yes, yeah. Oh, well, I'll take one more. Yeah.
Do you see any nations around the world going to a significantly more free market in the coming year, just in the that are further along the road, say, than the Russians and the Chinese and so?
Well, I think there's a lot of. I mean, England obviously is going up quite a bit distance, and I think a lot of countries in Western Europe, and it's and a lot of the third world countries. I mean, New Zealand has had a tremendous, I call that third world, had a tremendous overthrowing of their status system by a Labour Party government, interestingly enough, to the tune of hysteria and historical opposition to the conservatives in New Zealand, overthrowing price control, all the rest of it, and then big cut in taxes. So there's a lot of movement all over the place, and there's obviously big opposition, and but I think it's going to win out. I think it's going to be a 21st century freedom. Thank you very much.